The PRovoke Podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Paul Holmes, the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of PRovoke Media. I've been writing, talking, and thinking about public relations for about 40 years. And this is designed as the first in a new series of CCO-focused podcasts that PRovoke Media will be producing over the coming months. We don't have a snappy title for it yet, but once we do, we'll plaster it all over our website. And I am very fortunate to be joined for the first of this series by Lenovo CCO Charlotte West and by Adrian Monck, who is a veteran of the World Economic Forum and Davos, and is now an independent consultant, publishing a newsletter and providing input to AI company, which all sounds very fascinating. But it's Adrian's experience with Davos and the WEF that brings him here today, because we're going to be having a conversation about the things that CCOs need to know as they accompany their business leaders to the World Economic Forum next year. There seems to be quite a lot going on in the world right now that might engage discussion and debate in Davos, and we'll get to that later. But let's start with some brief introductions. Adrian, tell us a little about your experience and your role with the WEF over the last few years.
Sure. I first went to Davos, I think, in 2007 when I was a professor. I was running a journalism school in London. And it was a fascinating experience to kind of go and see the world that the WEF had created in this little Swiss ski resort. And I got the bug. And a couple of years later, there was an opportunity to join the forum. And I joined to run all of their media communications and some of their communities. So I spent about 13, 14 years doing that and left a year or so ago. But yeah, it's a fascinating organization, and it does a lot of fascinating things, not just Davos, but a lot more besides. But Davos is probably what it's best known for.
You must have seen the event evolve quite a bit over those 13 or 14 years. I know that it's in the last few years become sort of ubiquitous in the media and the political landscape and the business realm. But how have you seen it change?
Well, that was one of my jobs, was to actually make it ubiquitous and put it in that kind of place. But yeah, it has changed a great deal. It's gone from being kind of a cozy, slightly Bilderberg-esque kind of meeting to being really a kind of global forum, up there with, the COP meetings, with the IMF World Bank meetings. It's one of those markers on the global calendar that every world leader and CEO will have as a point of reference when they want to get together and meet people. So it has changed a great deal. It's been digital as well during COVID, so we had to pull it off in kind of virtual form. We've even done it in the summer. It's changed a great deal, and in ways that I think the forum has tried to shape, and also in ways that reflect some of the other things about it, which is that the town itself has a kind of life and a kind of organic sense that comes alive during the meeting, and that's something that I think is interesting too.
And Charlotte, you're a relative neophyte, certainly by comparison to Adrian. Last year was your first time at Davos, which still puts you one ahead of me. But tell me a little bit about sort of your background, first of all, and what your experience was like last year.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And yeah, totally different experience to Adrian, obviously, as a relative newcomer to Davos from an attendance point of view. So my background is I've spent half my career in PR agencies and half my career in-house, more or less half my career in-house. So definitely two sides of a coin that I've experienced. Primarily working for big technology companies of many shapes and forms from a global perspective. But most recently, my role is head of corporate communications at Lenovo, a big global tech company. So Davos is something that we had attended over the years. We'd had executives go at various points in time. Sometimes more went, sometimes fewer went. Then obviously there was COVID. So we'd always had some kind of presence over the years. So I'd always supported from afar in a way, because as everyone knows, it's not a cheap place to go. It's not a cheap place to stay. And it's pretty complex, to navigate it from an attendance point of view sometimes. But this year, it was actually this year, so 2024, that was my first event. And I think I probably had, being really honest, a bit of a sort of pejorative view of Davos, that many people have. I remember somebody posting online just before Davos last year, something like, I can't wait for all of the PR people to start posting about how amazing Davos is. And it sort of made me think I was probably a bit cynical about it as well, until I went and experienced it. And I think that the sort of three biggest takeaways for me were it was this incredibly efficient moment in time, place, space, the number of people you get to meet. For our CEO in particular, the number of business meetings the sheer number of business meetings he could get through in 3 or 4 days it's like nowhere else in the world, or no other point in time in the world. So it's like incredibly efficient. I was actually surprised about how equitable it felt as an environment. Again, this was a perception sitting on the outside, never having been there, that it was super elite. It is, of course. There's lots of very, very, very important people there. I remember getting stuck on the promenade because Zelensky was on the move, and, all the snipers were out on the rooftops, and, we had to all detour around a different route to get to the places we needed to be. So there are some very, very important people there. But everybody still has to stand in the same security queue to get into the Belvedere Hotel. There's no. I'm sure there's a VIP entrance that I wasn't aware of. But primarily, like you could be, somebody's executive assistant, or you could be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You're all standing in the same security queue. So there was this sort of surprising feeling to me of it being quite equitable. And then I think the third thing was, it was actually really enjoyable. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did. I think it was it's a beautiful place. And I was sort of soaking it all in as the first time. As I said, I didn't have the cynicism maybe of people that have gone many times. And because of the timing in the calendar year that it is, it's like a really, energetic way to kind of kick off the year. It certainly was for me anyway, for my first experience.
So, and that's an interesting sort of summary of the experience. How much were you able to enjoy it, and how much was there is a really set agenda that, of things that my CEO wants to accomplish while he's here, and it's my job to make sure that those things get accomplished. So how sort of mission and objective focused was it for you?
Yeah, so our objective as a business for attending or as a company for attending is business meetings, because, as I said, it's this unique place where you can kind of get through them all in a very efficient space of time. So, but I think other companies will have different objectives. Some might be going for networking. Some CEOs might be going for visibility and vanity reasons. I think that's probably fair for some. Some might be going to learn. Some companies might be going to promote something or launch something. We see that quite a bit. So I think it depends on the objective of why we're there. So as I said, our focus is business meetings. We do have a team of people there. So I don't have to worry about the logistics of getting our CEO from A to B, but I do have to worry about making sure he is informed ahead of those meetings, not just from okay, is this a current customer? What are we doing with them? Because the sort of business, we work with the business team to handle that, but more from okay, what is going on in the world? What are the insights? What companies have made big announcements at Davos? What are we seeing come out as the big themes from World Economic Forum itself? Because you do feel when you're there like you're in a bit of a bubble. So it's like what happens in Davos, and then there's like everything else that is talked about Davos that you might see on the main news agenda. So it's making sure that they stay informed from an insights perspective while you're in Davos itself, so that they can walk into those meetings with something different to say, or they can say, "Oh, I read a really interesting story on." Making sure that they're staying connected, despite the fact that they're moving from meeting to meeting with very little space in between.
Okay, Adrian, is that your experience too, in terms of what the expectations are of the corporate leaders attending the event?
I mean, you've got to balance out who's there. Okay, you've got corporate leaders, political leaders, academic leaders, Nobel Prize winners, a whole host of folks from different backgrounds. So you're bringing them together to create a meeting around a theme. And the corporate leaders are coming to be part of that experience. You're absolutely right. When Charlotte says you can have more meetings in one day than you can probably anywhere else in the world, 100%. But that's not the only reason to go to Davos, because if it is your only reason to go to Davos, you're going to miss out on a lot of other things. One of them is that serendipity of standing next to somebody really important. One of them is, or interesting, one of them is that moment where you might be exposed to something you hadn't thought about or hadn't realized before, and that you're in a space with other people you can mobilize to do something. I mean, I'll give you a very quick example. In the year COVID broke, it happened just as the meeting was coming to an end. We had these reports coming out of China about a very, very bad strain of virus. We had a quick moment to convene some really top global public health experts and a guy from a company that was doing something in mRNA called Moderna, Stefan Bonsal. So Stefan went to that briefing that we put on there and then, brought Chinese folks in there, public health people, WHO people, and from that meeting, he left and went straight back to his labs and got to work. Now, that's the kind of thing that you can do in a place like Davos, where you're exposed to news, events, people who you can mobilize to do something fast on something important. And that, I think, gets often lost in the kind of, the saga of Davos itself. But if you go to Davos just thinking you're going to have meeting after meeting after meeting, you're really going to miss out, because the organization has a lot of resources and puts a lot of effort into trying to move the needle on certain issues. If you can get on board with those issues, then you can actually do something to move that needle further. And I think that's what's really interesting about Davos, as opposed to other meetings and other places where CEOs and world leaders and other folks get together.
Yeah, Adrian, I agree on that. And I think that that's one of the jobs that we have to do as comms leaders, is to counsel and coach our leaders that are there who maybe want to over prioritize or over index on one particular area, to say, but you should take some time within your, if they're there for 3 or 4 days, which is quite a long time for a CEO to be in one place, take that time to go to that session at the Congress Center, because it is an opportunity to learn, and maybe CEOs don't always have the time to sort of indulge those learning moments. And it's an opportunity for all of those serendipitous conversations that you have, because I remember reading somewhere that somebody said there's, a journalist or politician lurking around every corner at the Congress Center. And that sounds like a bit nefarious, but it's actually the opposite. Like, what a great opportunity, because it is though. And I always think that the security queues are some of the best places to have those serendipitous moments, because you're just all standing there. You like, everybody's moving at the same pace to get through this thing. And the trick is actually, and again, role for us as in comms, is to make sure you're looking at everybody's badges. So like, see that person that's 3 ahead of you in the queue and introduce them to, your CEO that you're standing with to get through security. So, yeah, I agree. You've got to balance it. And And I think that's a role that we can play to encourage our leaders to do that.
So I'm really interested in what you said, Charlotte, because in the conversations that I've had with other CCOs about Davos, it almost sounded as if the typical priority there was almost being the social secretary for the CEO. I mean, as you were describing, setting up those meetings, briefing for those meetings, introducing to journalists and activists and other business leaders and politicians, and just making sure that the sort of social calendar makes it sound a little more frivolous than it obviously is, but that the schedule is always productive, and then I think if I can sort of paraphrase what Adrian just said, overscheduling can be kind of a problem because it doesn't leave you time to discover and for all that serendipity to take place that can be actually more valuable than the scheduled meetings. So how do you, as you're preparing for the next one of these, sort of try to strike that balance? And how much can you, as a communications leader, shape that experience, and how much are you pretty much at the mercy of a CEO who has a sort of predefined idea of what he or she wants?
So I think that the way I look at it from what our role is perspective is this idea of connecting and convening. So we've got to help our leaders make the right connections and convene them in the right places at an environment, or in an environment like World Economic Forum. And that could be, business meetings is one part of it. That would tend to be driven, certainly in our case, by our CEO's office. You know, he'll have a view of who he wants to be meeting with. But there are so many other opportunities, as Adrian said, in Davos itself. So, you know, there will be like 5 dinners in an evening that, you know, a leader will get invited to. So actually, we've got to help our CEO make the decision about which one or 2 do they go to. And often they will go to 2. You know, they'll do starter and main course at one and dessert and drinks at the other one, because they've got to just split themselves and divide themselves between these different places. So I think our job is to help, you know, evaluate which is the best one and why, and make the case for go to this dinner but not this dinner. And sometimes, you know, it's not easy because you might not know who else is going, and there's all of those different things. But if, you know, you have to then go back to the objective. If the objective is business meetings or networking or visibility or whatever it is, where is the one that offers the best opportunity for that? So I know it's obvious, and we always say this in all of the work we do, what is the objective in the first place, but be really clear on that. Then you can make the judgments on the events that you're recommending and counselling leadership to go to.
So you have experience of watching from and presumably helping from a distance, and being on the ground now with the CEO. Should CCOs in your position in other companies be lobbying to actually be there? Did you find that you could add more value because you were accompanying the CEO than you had been able to add from a distance?
Yes, for primarily because of this idea of like there's stuff that happens in Davos and there's everything that is reported outside in the world. And I think if you're just sitting here like I am today in my home office, like you don't have the sense or the feeling of really what's going on or really what's being talked about. So I think having gone and being together with you know, some of our leadership, you know what needs to be done. You know that they don't have much time to get from A to B. You know that they're going to do 3 dinners. You know that they're going to be really tired because their first meeting started at 7 a.m. and their last one finished at 11:30. So, like, I think you have a much greater empathy for understanding how to get the best out of the time that they have there, and understanding what we're seeing them in action to know what they get energized by and excited by. Because you don't have that if you're just getting a report back from the people that are on the ground. So I think being there with them is really important. And I'm sure we'll come on to discuss in a minute. But I think even as comms leaders, we have a role to be there in our own right, as well as being there to support our leadership.
Right. I will come to that in a second, because I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
But Adrian, as a communications professional, how aware were you of the sort of volume of other communications pros there and how that's built over the years? I get the feeling that a decade ago it would have been pretty unusual for a CCO to be there with the leader of the company, and now it's increasingly commonplace. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, I think of the 100 top global companies who are present in Davos, about a third of them bought their CCOs the last couple of years. So it's definitely becoming more part of that. You know, they each have delegations, they choose who they're bringing, and that choice often reflects the focus the company has. You know, if they bring the CMO, the CCO, the CFO, who are they going to position in terms of their own global leadership? But you know, they're typically having to bring delegations. And I think, you know, the role of communications has become so much more important in the last 5-10 years, because people are starting to see that it's really important how you tell the story and how you motivate people. And I think, you know, the role of the CCO has become more important. And with it, the importance of going to places like Davos and being on the ground, as Charlotte says, that importance grows. But you're definitely fighting, obviously, in any global organization, the other folks who want to be there too. And there is only so much room in town. And if you're there, you're taking someone else's space. So you want to make sure you're adding value. And I think that's the kind of, you know, that's the calculus, if you like, for global companies when they look at who they're sending and who they're putting in Davos. But, you know, Charlotte's right. You can achieve an incredible amount by being present and being physically there. And I think that's one of the things that we're coming back to in this very digital, very online age, is the importance of real, personal, physical connection and understanding what's being talked about on the street. You know, you're creating in this tiny alpine village a kind of mini global community. And it really is. You know, you've got people from almost every country on earth. You've got people in leadership positions in almost every arena of human activity. And actually finding out what concerns them, even if it's not ultimately illuminating, other than discovering what the kind of conventional wisdom is, that's still a powerfully important thing.
And Adrian, what kind of resources does the WEF provide for attendees that CCOs need to be aware of and can tap into to make their experience more valuable?
I mean, increasingly, you know, the big premium in Davos is always space. You know, that premium is being met to some extent now as the forum moves into providing more space for people to meet and convene. The other acknowledgement is that the forum was in charge of the agenda for Davos. It sets the theme. This year, I think it's Collaboration for Intelligent Age, and then it convenes around that theme. And, you know, typically people say the themes are wishy-washy or they're weak and weedy, but actually what you're trying to do is come up with something that works as a concept for everyone, from the president of Peru to the president of Patagonia to, you know, the leader of the People's Republic of China. So you're trying to put everyone into a framework that works for them. And then if you think about not just the space, but the actual speaking opportunities that you have there, you know, people look at them very much as a soapbox. And I think that's the wrong way to look at them. What you've got in Davos is a chance to have a real dialogue with people. And if you go prepared to have that dialogue, to actually listen and contribute based on what you've heard, rather than read out your talking points, you will make 100 times the impression you would have made just sitting there with your card telling people what you've been told to say. And I think, again, for that kind of interaction to work, it really helps to have someone with that CCO experience like Charlotte there to help brief you in person and just give you some reassurance and some guidance through those kind of moments.
That raises another question that I had about the experience, Charlotte, which is, how much of your time are you or should you be glued to the CEO's side and sort of holding his hand sounds a little patronizing.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
but making sure that he is maximizing his or she is maximizing her experience.
Yeah.
And how much time do you have as CCO rather, to meet with stakeholders, to meet with other people in your role, to sort of get your own distinct Davos experience? Yeah. And obviously, I have a sort of self-interest in asking that question, in that increasingly we have been partnering with participating organizations on our own events at Davos, which we're looking to bring the CCO community together to find commonalities of interest. So how much time do you have for that, or should you carve out for that?
Yeah, I think my first point would be it depends on the CEO that you're working with. So some, will want you there, as you say, holding their hand all of the time. Others will, you might interact with a few times in the day to brief them on something. And then, the sort of logistics team, for want of a better term, will handle getting them from A to B to their meetings. And the reality is you might not have a badge that gives you access to the same places your CEO can access. So on that basis, you may not be able to be glued to them throughout the day, but somebody else in the team will be, because they do need to be ferried around. It's not, you need somebody that knows the space and the place to be able to get them from where they need to be quickly. So I would say it really does depend. From the point of view of my first experience in January this year, because it was my first year, I didn't know what I didn't know. I signed up to some things, I talked to a few people that had been before in person in similar roles to me, got some good advice, mostly about things like shoes and taking protein bars, because you can never find enough to eat. I did experience.
That's going to be the headline, by the way. Shoes
Yes.
and protein bars.
Just some protein bars, or boots and protein bars, it should be. I signed up for a few things. So quite a lot of the big media houses will run, breakfasts, for example. There was Reuters did one for sort of CMOs and CCOs, which was a great experience to sit with people from completely different industries, for example, or conversely, they do dinners. There's all the after drinks and after party stuff. So you have to be pretty resilient about getting through the day. But then there were some other things that I did. So I did the PRovoke breakfast with Aaron, which was fantastic and a real highlight. I did the Edelman Trust Barometer launch for the first time in person. I've followed that for forever. So there was a real privilege to be there in person, to listen to Richard and the other speakers present the data at that event, and get to network with people and talk about it afterwards. So rather than just, listening on a Zoom screen, I got to chat to people afterwards as well. And then I think there was, I spoke on a couple of panels. So I think you have a role as a comms leader to actually be, in the broadest corporate affairs sense, be a voice and representative of the company. So there's places where is a really good opportunity for us to be, but is not C-level from a CEO point of view. And actually you can be a company representative to do that. So I did a few of those things. Some media dinners, of course, agencies tend to organize those things. And then I also happen to have a role as a board director on our Lenovo Foundation, which is our philanthropic entity. So there was some NGO stuff that I did when I was there as well. So to Adrian's point, there's, if you're a startup looking for investment, is a great place to be. If you're an NGO, it's a great place to make connections to help, facilitate funding in the future. So I think you need to look at your role that will be unique for everybody depending on their company, and what value can you get out of it. So there isn't a percentage where I would say I should spend 20% of my time, on doing stuff for me, for want of a better term, and then 80% with the CEO. It really does depend on the organization and what you need to do when you're there.
What kind of mistakes have you seen CCOs and companies in general make at Davos, Adrian?
I think there's a lot of overscheduling. There's a lot of looking at it very transactionally. And I think that's a mistake when it comes to looking at what the potential is for the forum, because the forum is incredibly well resourced, but it's a not-for-profit. It's got 800 people working for it, almost all of whom have master's degrees, many of whom have PhDs. It's got an incredible secretariat. And if you're a CEO or C-suite leader who wants to start building a coalition or doing something beyond just the confines of the business, which, let's be honest, when you get to that level in global business, you do have ambitions beyond simply the business itself. And businesses themselves need those kind of diplomatic coalitions with governments, with other businesses to kind of move the needle on some issues. Then it's a real opportunity. And it's got the kind of both the intellectual capacity and the people capacity to help do that. But you've got to be willing to check your ego at the door. What's not going to work is if you go in and say, I'm going to do the convening, I'm going to be the big I am, I'm going to be the person, you're going to come to me. If you go in with a little bit of corporate humility and want to work with other leaders in a very straightforward and useful way, you've got all the tools there at your disposal. You've got the meetings there, you've got the people there, you've got the support staff and the kind of secretariat potentially who can help you. I think all of that is something that comes with being part of the forum. And typically it gets missed out. We hear people say, I started at 7 o'clock, I finished at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was 15 minutes. It's great, but there's more that you can achieve than that. And there's more to business than that. And I think that's what the message of the forum is at the end, is it's not just about numbers, profits and bottom lines. It's also about trying to see, can we move the needle on something important?
Was there anything, Charlotte, beyond the couple of things that you've already mentioned, was there anything that you wish you'd known before you got there, or that you look back on and would have done differently? Mistakes or just gaps in your understanding?
Yeah, I think it's a sort of very practical thing of to Adrian's point about the scheduling piece, of trying to work out what to go to, when to have gaps, what's right to attend and what you can actually miss or convene in a different way. And it is a bit overwhelming, I would say, the first time, because you might either have not know the things, so it's like you don't know what you don't know. You don't know the things that you should be going to, or you kind of say yes to everything, and then inevitably you realise when you get there that you can't quite make all of that work because you can't get from that end of town to that end of town in the time that you've got. The example I used about President Zelensky and the promenade being shut. I ended up being 45 minutes late for a dinner, but then so was everybody else, so it was fine. But it sort of has a knock-on effect of what else you go to. So I think it's just that making sure that you pace yourself and balance the time with the right things and leave times for serendipitous moments. I remember bumping into an old boss as I walked along the promenade, going from one meeting to another meeting, who I hadn't seen in 10 years. He was there. It was one of those things. If I hadn't stopped to tie up my lace on my boot, I would not have seen him. He was there with a startup, that he's investing in, so it was one of those wonderful, moments. So you've got to give yourself time for those to be okay. If I'd been late for a meeting, I would have been rushing and I couldn't have even spoken to him. So I think it's that sort of timing piece. I think the other thing I would say is, if you've not been to Davos before, or the business hasn't, worked with somebody that has, and that could be an agency. There's plenty of agencies that have got good experience of doing work for clients at Davos. They can help you navigate some of this and get you on the invite list for certain things, or say to you, that's not worth doing, but this is worth doing. So take insight from either an agency partner. I mean, it may be an agency that you've not worked with before because you need to find the right skill set, and other people in jobs like you. People are very generous with their time about wanting to talk about their experience and pass it forward or pay it forward. So I would say do your research would be my biggest piece of advice.
Let's wind up by talking a little bit about what we expect the conversation to be this year. The sort of the theme of collaborating and in an intelligent age is all well and good, but there is so much going on in the world right now. I think we've all heard the statistic about 2/3 of the world's population has been in elections this year. There have been big elections in India, in Europe, in the UK, now in the US. The political landscape seems to have shifted quite a bit in the last 12 months. There is, one philosophy or ideology or whatever that seems to be in the ascendant, and fueling a backlash against some of the themes that have been articulated in the last couple of Davoses. Situations like polarization and disinformation have gotten worse rather than better, I would suggest, since the last time the forum convened. What are you anticipating in terms of the big issues and the big discussion topics this year? Adrian?
I mean, look, the event that kicks off Davos outside Davos is, Monday, January 20th. Donald Trump is inaugurated. Now, there will definitely be, I put money on it, members of the team in Davos starting to build relationships and moving things forward. Last time Anthony Scaramucci in his very brief tenure popped into Davos to set some of the tone and some of the expectations, along with a bunch of other cabinet and potential cabinet members. I think you'll see some of those folks show up. I think, again, going back to the playbook of previous eras, Xi Jinping made a very, very notable speech, putting China forward as being the kind of guardian of globalization in Davos, taking advantage of that kind of slight isolationist drift in American policy. I would imagine that there'll be senior Chinese delegates there making the same kind of case. I think you'll see some of the kind of geopolitical fault lines emerging. We're seeing increasingly Europe stuck between its relationship with the United States and its trading relationship with China. It relies on the US for its defense. It relies on China for its trade. So it's going to have to make some tough decisions, and you're going to see some senior European leaders there, I'm sure. I think that, the new Trump era will be the dominant theme, and the consequences therein. That's what I think every single business leader right now is wondering about. What does it mean for my business? What does it mean for the global impact? What does it mean in terms of who I do business with? And all of those questions are going to loom very, very large over Davos, which is why I think it will be an extremely interesting and important meeting, this 2025 meeting, because those kind of questions, the timeliness of them, I think, it's going to be one to be there for.
From your perspective, Charlotte, are there questions that you're looking to get answered, or discussions that you're looking to start or advance this year or next year?
Yeah, next year. Not specifically that I can speak to at the moment. I think what's interesting for me about Davos sometimes is what's not spoken about as opposed to what is. I think, Adrian summed it up brilliantly around what will be hot on everyone's lips in January 2025, particularly because of the timing of the event. But I was really surprised, this year in 2024, that climate change it didn't feel very present on the agenda or on the promenade when you saw what companies were doing and how they were showing up. So I think sometimes it's like what gets missed. That's hard to say for some reason, as opposed to what is spoken about, and also what you hear reported in the outside world based on what's spoken. What the keynotes are at the Congress Center versus what you see reflected in the companies that are taking over the shops and branding them on the promenade. So, for example, in 2024, there was a huge Middle East presence on the promenade for companies and significant number of organizations from India. So you suddenly see this very specific dynamic based on who is there paying money to attend and show up and investing versus what you always hear from the keynotes, from the key themes from the Congress Center itself. So I think it'll be interesting to see what isn't covered in January 2025.
I think that what Charlotte said is really interesting about how people perceive Davos, because, journalists as well, despite years of kind of trying to educate them about it, the actual Congress Centre is what the forum runs and the area around it. They don't control the streets of Davos, because Davos is its own town and it's its own place. If Klaus Schwab had wanted to make millions and millions and millions, he would have bought every single property in Davos up, and he would have bought every single hotel block. But, that his interest has always been in the kind of issues side of things. And I think the forum, sits in that space. It is interesting to see who's trying to make a big noise, but that big noise is being made by people who are going and making deals with shop owners and the local burghers of Davos. And it does tell a certain kind of story. It tells you where the money is in the world, who's shouting loudest. And obviously the developments in the Middle East, I think that you've seen the last 5-10 years, where there's been a lot more assertiveness about the role it can play in the world, where you've seen a lot more change going on. I think those developments, you can absolutely see them on the promenade, and you can see who's spending money to have their voice heard. But things like climate change, which ironically started to make a difference in Davos. It was that partnership between Kofi Annan and the forum in the 1990s that started some of those discussions. The forum played a key role in Macron's Paris COP, getting private sector companies to put pledges behind government deals. That energy's run out. And, you can see that in meetings like the one we just had in Baku. And so the forum is part of that kind of global architecture now of meetings where the world gets together, or at least the world's leaders get together. And for that reason, it gets a lot of stick, because there's a lot of people who are left off the guest list, or who feel they've been left off the guest list. And a lot of people who want to knock it down in order to replace it with something they own and operate. And I think, as long as it can continue, Switzerland remains relevant as a neutral base to hold it. It plays a really important part in the kind of global ecosystem of meetings, and having, people I used to work with who are incredibly smart, incredibly motivated, who want to live up to the mission, kind of bringing people together for that reason, I think is very, very important.
Great, fascinating stuff. I'm sure there will be a record number of CCOs at the event this year. I suspect there will be a record number of PR agencies involved on the fringes, at least. And I'm very much looking forward to, and slightly intimidated by, my first visit to Davos, but I hope I'll see both of you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the PRovoke podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.